Hello and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Spectrum, Every Age, Every Need. I am Sean Francis, and today this is a solo venture. I am the only one hosting here today. As you know, from time to time, I'm joined by my fellow caregivers and warriors, Maurice McDavid and Susanna Peace Lavelle. And what we're in the middle of now is a series that we've put together entitled Caregiving and Relationships. And we will be covering relationships are everything, and everything is relationships. Anything that matters to the general public matters to those of us who are parents or caregivers to someone with a disability, or the elderly, whatever that case might be, 10 times more so. And relationships are no exception. So, what we'll be covering in this series are relationships with the people we love, relationships with money, relationships with um, a being greater than ourselves. We don't want to call it religion or spirituality, it's broader than that. And a variety of other things. But where it all begins, I think, is our relationship with ourselves. And I have, been going through a lot of self discovery myself. And so I'm sharing from that perspective. And for some of these other topics, we're also going to include our relationship with food, nutrition, all those different things. And we're going to have people from different industries that will support those things that will be in from time to time. And I think the topic is so vast and great that, you know, they don't necessarily get covered in just one sitting. And that's why here we are today in a part two of relationship with oneself. But we're going to jump right into it. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Beyond the Spectrum. All right, well, let's get right to it. Before we do that, let's thank our community partners, Billy Footwear. They are the makers of adaptive footwear for all. The founder, Billy Price, is a walking testament and story to greatness and perseverance. He suffered a catastrophic injury the first week of his freshman year in college and was paralyzed as a result of that. Learned how to do everything for himself all over again, with the exception of putting shoes on. A prototype was created and Billy Footwear was born. And since then, they have sold over 1 million pairs of shoes and touched countless lives. If you click on the link in the show notes, you will get 10% off of your final purchase. And that includes when they have sales that are taking place, which they usually do as we go in and out of seasons. They're an amazing company with a great quality product and part of a great cause. We also want to thank our community partner, Soul Grain Granola. Now, when you hear that, you may think, okay, it's a company that makes granola, but they make it with all natural ingredients and they have some amazing flavors. And we are honored to be in business with them. If you look in the show notes, you will find your discount code, which is B as in boy, T as in Tom, S as in Sam, the number 10. So that's BTS10, and that will get you 10% off your final purchase from Soul Grain. So let's get into it. We're talking about relationships with one's self. And I was thinking about something today where, I think, at least for me, a lot of this is just from my own experience. Those of you that have been following the show for a while may know that I am primarily a financial services professional. And, I help businesses and individuals and families with things from life insurance, short and long term savings, um, estate planning, debt elimination, tax issues. There's a wide plate of things that we provide. And I've been thinking about my journey in that industry. And when I realized that if families with neurotypical children need to plan for a time when they exist only in memory, then it's twice as important for those of us who are caregivers. So we launched an initiative to build a bridge between financial service literacy and opportunity in the special needs community. My good friend Brian Altunian and I have been doing that for a while, and he hosted the previous podcast with me, Just Two Dads. But I was thinking of my entire time in that profession. September will make it 20 years. And I feel like everything that I've done up until, let's say, well, really, I guess right up until this moment, there's so many things, generally speaking, but especially in that industry and in my work, that are so crystal clear to me now that were not before. And the same thing has transpired in other areas of my life. And what I've found is that I'm not necessarily discovering new things, but I'm discovering new things and at the same time possessed with an overwhelming feeling that I knew all along that which I'm learning right now. Um, and I'm also learning how to describe that. So the relationship we have with ourselves has everything to do with who we are, who we become, and who we may evolve into being. And all those things play a role in how we react to getting the title of caregiver. And sometimes you don't even realize that that's what you are. If you're a parent and you have a child with a disability and a diagnosis, the way that you respond is dictated by your experience. But for the most part, what you're thinking is, all right, let's jump right into this and let's, what do we do? How do we face this? And so for my wife and I, we were each raised differently. But the ways in which we were raised that are similar is that you simply take care of your responsibilities, but the way in which we deal with it is different. In that my wife is very, okay, what do we need to do? Head down, go make it happen. I'm more that way now, but I used to sit back and be maybe a little more analytical about things and overthink things. I'm still dealing with the fact that I do overthink things. um, I have noted that part of my own journey consists of a recent diagnosis of ADHD. And what it does is it has allowed me to understand what my language is, the manner in which I process things, the manner in which I communicate. And the quest to seek out what I thought was, um, to seek out the diagnosis that I thought was there all along, that began with this deep look within. And that's where I continue to have these revelations. But what I was getting to is that I feel that a lot of what I'm discovering now and learning are things that were there all along. And the biggest thing I'm trying to do is figure out how to articulate that. The way it's helped me is that it allows me to give other people grace because I don't know where they are in their journey. I have no idea. But those things apply to a person, generally speaking. When you add the caregiving component, then things get really, really interesting, and each situation is different. So you may become a caregiver um, later in life because you are now caring for an elderly parent. Your children have been neurotypical, and your caregiving journey has been limited to the normal, quote unquote, normal path of parenting, and that's it. So maybe you're on a new journey as a result of caring for an elderly loved one or a parent. Maybe you're a first time parent and you have a child that is only a couple years old, and there's a diagnosis that is new and you're dealing with it that way. For some of you, you're doing that as a strong bonded couple, and you have a significant other that is in this fight with you, as I am blessed to be with my wife of 21 years. Or you might be someone who is a single parent. Maybe you were single from the very beginning, for most of your child's life. Or you might be someone for whom being a caregiver has really tested your marriage, and the marriage itself did not survive, because as we know, the divorce rate within the special needs community is higher than it is elsewhere. But wherever you might be, your relationship with yourself is I think, the most important. There's so many quote unquote experts and influencers all across social media in a bunch of different areas: nutrition, fitness, finance, general personal development, whatever. But the one thing that appeals to me always is when someone takes a very um, pragmatic approach and they simply share what they know, as opposed to telling people, here's what you should never do and you should always do this, always do that. So as a result of that, even when it comes to my opinion on money matters, given my experience, which is a little unique, 20 years in financial services as a professional and 20 years as a caregiver, I still feel that there's so much value in never allowing yourself to fully embrace the title of expert, because an expert is someone who doesn't really have anything else to learn, right? Um, but if I can share with you, here's what I've learned, here's how it helped me, maybe it can help you as well. And so that's the approach that I'm taking with that I do with anything that I have to share, but especially when it comes to the discovery and journey of self. So I don't want to bleed into our other area which is your relationship with God, creation, the universe, of spirituality, however you choose to define it. But I do believe, in a spiritual sense, at least for me, it has been that when I sit in silence, I find that most of the answers that I'm seeking either come to me, reveal themselves, but I'm still possessed with that feeling that I kind of I knew all along. There are those things you discover and you feel like I had no idea. Well, what's been really fascinating for me on this journey is that many things that have taken place, I find myself just feeling like I knew that all along. And if I knew all along, why did it not reveal itself a little later on? And I don't know. Here's what I mean with some of those things. I think I mentioned that in previous episodes. My curiosity about myself began with the conversations that have taken place on this podcast and when we did Just Two Dads with different therapists and other professionals that we've spoken with in the caregiving space. And between that and observing things that my son does in terms of his behavior as a result of being on the autism spectrum. And some of the very things that try my patience are things that I, although to a lesser extent, do as well. And so it made it, I don't know what's the best way to say this. It made me stop to think, I wonder what kind of link there is that between myself and autism and any kind of neurodivergence. And so, I made the appointments that I needed to between psychiatrists and therapists, and we got to that point. But in beginning that, I've continued to find, again, this I don't know, openness. I'm hoping that I'm making sense and adding value here today, because like I said, I'm working through my language as to how to express these things. But it's been a wonderful experience. The one thing I've completely embraced is that, when I met my wife, I thought, after we began dating, I was like, why couldn't I have met her years ago? I had a conversation with someone recently who has a son that is, I think he may be 10 years old. This is someone that became a father, excuse me, a parent later in life. And he talked about wondering why he couldn't have become a parent earlier in life. And I thought the same thing as well. But I realized that when I think of who I was in, let's say, my 20s, because I enjoy the role of husband and father so much, that the question comes about, why couldn't I have met my wife years ago? Why couldn't I have become a father years ago? I'm in good shape for my age and everything, and I can still, I can throw a ball and run around with my son. He's not a toddler, he's 20 years old. So we've had those bonding times where I'm able to pick him up and sort of, rough house and play in that kind of thing. But I've enjoyed it so much that it's become natural to, at some point, wonder, man, I sure wish I had more years of this. And why didn't this happen when I was younger? Why did I have to go through relationships that I did before meeting my wife? Why did that have to take place? And the one thing I've accepted is that, for one thing, I never would say that I was a bad person or anything like that, but I wouldn't be able to do with fatherhood or as good a job as I think I do with that or marriage in my 20s being who I was then. I was just, I was a mess in a lot of different ways, very, um, just very uncertain of a whole lot of things. But my uncertainty has never been one that has caused me to hang my head down in shame. And it was never like self loathing or anything. But if you recall me talking about my journey, I mentioned two things leading up to my own diagnosis, which was just before that. I looked in the mirror one day and I had this, I had two things that took place at the same time: a remarkable clarity about who I was looking at and a connection. And at the same time, I acknowledged that prior to that, seeing that connection, I had a disconnect from the person that I saw in the mirror before. And I didn't know how to explain that. And as I sit here, I'm sharing this as I'm discovering it. I think when you think of someone that has low self esteem, you think of someone that does, in fact, hold their head down, and maybe they're ashamed and there is self loathing. But I don't think you have to have full on self loathing in order to have a lack of self esteem. And I looked at myself in the mirror today, getting dressed, and I looked, and all of a sudden it hit me. I had a clear definition of the gap or the disconnect that I had previously. What would happen is I'd look in the mirror and I would think that the person in the mirror was, I don't know, let's say, this will sound strange, but better looking than I felt. And when I say better looking, I don't necessarily just mean that's a handsome man. I don't feel like a handsome man. It's more than just being a good looking individual, so to speak. It's just something that I don't know. Just I put it this way: I would feel like um, I wouldn't feel as good as I thought I looked, if that makes sense. So much so to the point that um, it's almost like, who is that? And that's kind of weird, and it's very, 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 very subtle, very subtle. But those things, I think, play a role in your everyday life and how you see yourself. Um, I think for me, where it stemmed from, I think I mentioned this before, is, I was always challenged academically, but never thought to lack intelligence, which I know from my parents was just a huge problem. And man, I don't know how they did what they did. My dad would say, I'd be like, "How did you just not give up?" Um, because I had tutors. Um, I had all kind of. I was never in special education, but I had tutors outside of school. I would have my teachers that would tutor me as well, and I just could not focus. And I remember um, feeling like I was going to just combust when I was sitting in a classroom, especially if I had to take a test. When I began taking the test and I'm sitting, I just wanted it to end. I just wanted it to be over, to the point where, to be really honest, lots of times I would, all right, if I have to sit here and take this test, I'm just going to guess, 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 guess. And then every now and then when I get good grades, like I might have stated before, my father would say, you could get these grades all the time if you would just try, because you're smart enough. But there was just never a connect. But I think what got me the most was having children being as honest as they are. When a teacher calls on you, you don't know the answer, and everybody laughs. That would kind of, I think that stayed with me for years. I wouldn't have anybody necessarily point and laugh. You know, um, outside of that given moment. Not like I got mocked and teased, but it was just enough, and it carried over into, man, so many other things that I did in life, and I just had it all wrong. My parents did everything they could to try and figure out why there was a disconnect there, but the way that I perceived it is what is just so messed up. I think most of us go through life with our mirror very cloudy. You know, one of the best things you could ever do is just work on a daily basis to clean that mirror, to see yourself for who you really are. And I think that digging within, whether you're going to sit in silence and meditate in some way, shape, or form, uh, or just start paying attention to yourself. I've said before, so much living is done on autopilot. It's done instinctively. We don't even think about what we think about when your given day, when you go someplace, when you go to work, come home. If you have a job that you physically go to, we don't think about the drive on the way home because it's one that we drive every day. Maybe even to your favorite grocery store or something like that. Other than the fact that you didn't run a red light or a stop sign, there's things along the way that you miss because our consciousness is not at its height. And so the answer to that, I think, for me anyway, is to live life as intentional as one possibly can. Those things, again, carry weight for the general population. For those of us who are caregivers, that becomes twice as important to do. Twice as important. So what I can do is I'll share a little bit about what I'm doing and what I'm going through. I didn't mention at the top of the show, we also have our men's group known as the Den, which is a support group for men who are caregivers. And we had a conversation this past week in our most recent call. We meet the link is in the show notes. It's free of charge. We have members from as far away as Mexico City, New York, California, where I am, Atlanta, and in between. And I shared with that group sort of a realization that I had come to, which I'll share with you before we, at some point here today, before we wrap up. But this whole journey of this self-discovery, getting older and growing is just such a beautiful and wonderful gift, and not everybody gets to do that. So I'm thankful to simply be here. But generally speaking, that matters and carries weight, and it especially does, again, when you're a caregiver. So one of our first responsibilities, generally speaking, is to foster, work on, and develop a good relationship with ourselves. When we think of our relationship with ourselves, the deepest most of us probably go with that is, what do you think of yourself? How do you see yourself? And those things matter. It's just as important to ask, what do you think of yourself? How do you see yourself? How would you describe yourself? And I think it's worthwhile to ask yourself that question perpetually, because one of the ways that I think we avoid just taking up room on the planet and making the best out of our visit here on Earth, because it is a visit. Tomorrow's a number of things, but a promise is not one of them. One of the things that have served me best is to continually ask that question, because the answer should over time evolve just as we do, which is, why I used to ask on the other show, on Just Two Dads, I'd close it by asking someone, give one thought or belief that you once believed to be true, but no longer believe to be true. And your answer to that question has a lot to do with how you spend your time here, how you live the life that you have. And going back to my thought before about just sharing, here's what's worked for me, here's what I've done, let me share that, as opposed to an expert telling you just what you need to do. There are some things that are, I guess, non-negotiable, but you could at least, address those things as being non-negotiable for you. What is Not what is non-negotiable for me is remaining today who I was yesterday. And that, I don't think most people realize how much work that takes. It's been a lifelong journey for me to do that and just continue to be a better person, generally speaking. Um, but back to my point, the relationship with ourselves is our first responsibility because it has everything to do with how we handle the responsibility of being a parent to a child, an actual child, or a young adult, or being a caregiver to that individual, or being a caregiver to an elderly parent who needs us there. It's just a different level of care. And those things become twice as important if you have a limited level of support around you as well, especially if you're then single. Your responsibility to yourself is it's just huge. And I find myself almost looking for words to, um, I don't know, not looking for words, but trying to wrap my head around what I'm trying to say because I think it is just, it's so big, it's so huge. I think it is that it's everything. Relationships, generally speaking, but especially our relationship with ourselves, and it is so embedded in us and so um, part of our subconscious that we don't really I think there's a lot of it that we're not aware of. Put it this way, I think I have more self awareness than the average person, and I'm nowhere near satisfied with the level of self awareness that I do have. So I think the level of self awareness that I possess, but the level of self awareness that I seek is just as, if not more important. And despite all of that, and that being the case for years, I'm continually finding out things about myself that I either didn't know or I'm realizing that, oh my gosh, that was there all along. I didn't realize that I thought that. So, there's a book by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Shad Helmstetter called What to Say When Talking to Yourself. Um, I think I have it here on my shelf. What to say? Yeah, it's actually what to say when you talk to yourself. And most of us talk to ourselves without thinking about what it is that we're saying. That's why affirmations are so important. There seems to be a little bit of a renaissance taking place with regard to um, with the release of the Michael Jackson movie, with regard to not so much, yeah, his talent and his artistry, but more than anything else, the way that he thought, and the idea of uh, maybe a reinvention of oneself from within. There's things that he obviously did in terms of his appearance that changed from what he wore to his hair, all these different things. But there's a metamorphosis that took place inside, and it started with um, him writing out the desires and goals that he had, making them affirmations, and then building a bridge between those things that are built in his mind and then built in reality. And when you're a caregiver, that stuff can be really difficult to do and focus on. I've got some affirmations I've been working on that uh, feel different from any that I've ever had before. And something else that hit me is that, one of the biggest keys to success is to first of all be able to define what success means for you. So when you talk about relationships with self, even when we talk about being successful, it's like, what does that mean? So what is it that one wants? Not everyone wants the same thing. And even if there's something today that you want really, really bad, which a lot of people have experienced, you've heard of the difference between success and fulfillment. So you may want something really, really bad, you get it or attain it, and realize that you don't really want it that much after all. And there's several reasons for that. They always say that the journey is so much more fulfilling than the destination. Um, and I think what is key to a lot of that is knowing what you want and then knowing why. Because I don't think we stop and think about why we want certain things. And if the reason why isn't in alignment with who you really truly are. And this goes back to the relationship with self. I don't know how much of us really know who we really, really are in our core. And there's some of us that, based on our experience, are not very nice people and have demons that we're dealing with. But I'd like to think, and maybe this is just the optimist in me, that deep inside all of us, when we come into this world, is someone who is good at heart and has the capability to enrich the lives of other people in countless ways, in ways that you might not even begin to imagine. But along the way, some of us get um, sidetracked from who we are. I believe that when we come into this world, we are as close to perfect as we are probably ever going to be, and the world around us will change who we are in many ways. Will take us away from that child within us. The child within us is um, uh, it's perfection personified. I think, we're a product of creation, and that's just, my belief. I don't want to push anything on anyone, but I truly believe that. And some of the purity gets taken away by the world around us, especially right now with all the distractions that we have, the separation um, between people, and um, loving each other less and not enough, quite frankly. There's just so much of that. But if we can get back to who we really, really, truly are, some of us are so far away from it that we may forget. And I think that all of those things, being able to know what that is and be clear about it, has everything to do with the way that we show up to give care. So if there's something that you really want, here's what I would suggest. First of all, determine what is success to you. What is happiness to you? What is it that really, really, truly fulfills you? And stop and think about it, even if you know off the top of your head. And once you know what that is, then acknowledge why. Maybe write that down. And then put everything within your heart to go ahead and pursue that. Because I think having something to pursue, this is a whole nother topic, but having a dream to pursue, I think that enhances one's ability to give care also. Um, and affects the manner in which we show up to give that care. Even if you're in a situation where you resigned yourself to the fact that this loved one needs me for the rest of their life, there's no way I can chase the dream that I had and still be there for them. Even if you've embraced that thought, you probably still need to deal with its effect upon you, because caregiving, again, depending upon the level of care that one has to give, it's all consuming. It really is. And it can take so much of you that it's easy for yourself to forget who you might be at your core, because the only important thing for you to be is the best caregiver you can be, right? But you've heard the analogy of being a passenger on a plane. When the oxygen mask comes down, you got to put yours on first to make sure that you have the strength that you need to help someone. You can't. Your ability to help someone from a place of weakness is not half as effective as your ability to help someone from a place of strength. And being centered on who you really truly are has everything to do with your strength as much as it does your compassion or anything else. So, you know, you start by asking, who am I outside of being a caregiver? Uh, you know, if you take away the caregiving aspect, there are people who, after getting married and becoming a parent, and I think this may happen, I hear about this a little more with women than I do with men, people have to stop and ask themselves after a certain age, who am I besides a wife? Who am I besides a mother? Who am I, like, deep, deep inside? That's a question that if you live to be 500, don't ever stop asking yourself, because there's so much more power in questions than there are in statements. And you'll find, I think, more often than you think, that the answer that you're seeking is within you and has been there all along, but just needs to come out. Now, for some of us, there really is an evolution that takes place as you change, and people do make these drastic changes. But I at least often wonder, especially with the changes that I'm going through, which I'll share more in detail as they reveal themselves. is is it a complete change, or are you just revealing who you had the capacity to be all along, like cracking a shell and having a rebirth, so to speak? Um, anyway, that's what I have on this topic of relationships with oneself. And as we continue this series and look at various relationships, you know, don't necessarily know how long each episode is going to be. It's going to be very free flowing and just kind of let it go. Some of them are going to be a little more structured. One that is going to be I don't know how many parts it's going to take because I have so many different views on it as it continues to evolve, and I'm looking forward to it. Is our relationship with money. Uh, I'm continuing to learn that along the way, and I think there's going to be some great value that you may get from something like that. So for everyone that has been supportive and checked out every episode, we want to thank you. We want to encourage you to like, subscribe, and share. And you can find find the episodes at our YouTube channel. You can find it at our website, which is beyondthespectrumpodcast.com. And then if you want to reach out to us, you can email us at changetheworld@beyondthespectrumpodcast.com. That is changetheworld@beyondthespectrumpodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. If there's a topic that you think is something that would be of interest, or someone that you think we should be in communication with, we'd love to hear. And if you or someone you know is a male caregiver and you would appreciate being able to just be in a room where you're not alone and your victories, your challenges are all shared in a very safe space, I encourage you to look at the show notes where you'll find the link for our men's group, The Den. We meet bi-weekly, every other Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. on Zoom, and it's been one of the most rewarding things that I've ever been a part of. And again, also consider our community partners. We want to thank Billy Footwear and Soul Grain. If you click on the link in the show notes, you will find where you'll get a discount for each. And we've got some great things coming up. And I want to thank you for tuning in. And remember, let's try and be a little bit more childlike, less childish, ask more questions, make more statements. And to each and everyone within the sound of my voice, we love you. Thank you so much.